Hello all, and welcome back to LawWon Gaming. In my last carrier video, which was just about half a year ago now, I mentioned how fighters can also be effective against missile weapons, but I didn't really go into any details about that. Well, today we're going to take an in-depth look at how effective fighters are against missile-based weapons. So let's get started and roll the intro. Now, before we can roll up our sleeves and start throwing fighters at missiles, let's talk about the stats. And boy, there are a lot of them. First, we'll go into our fighter crafts, going from scouts all the way to Mark III fighters. And here they are, and let's break down what each stat means. First, with average damage. Each fighter unit has a range of damage. For example, scouts deal 1 to 2 damage. Since it's just as likely for a scout to deal 1 damage as 2 damage, the average damage is 1.5. Next, we look at accuracy. And we can see that each fighter craft is only going to hit their intended target 70% of the time at most. This means 30% of the shots will miss regardless of the enemy's evasion. At least. And we can expect this is going to get worse as the invasion goes up. Thirdly, we look at tracking, which starts at 10% and goes up by 10% for each fighter level. Why tracking matters is that it is essentially an anti-evasion stat, where the enemy's evasion will drop by whatever the unit's tracking stat is. For example, let's say we have something with 50% evasion and is being attacked by a Mark III fighter. The Mark III fighter has 40% tracking, so the enemy's evasion is lowered by an effective 10%. Couple that with the Mark III fighter's accuracy of 70%, and we'd expect roughly 60% of the Mark III fighter shots to land. However, tracking and evasion may not work exactly hand in hand like that, so bear that in mind as I haven't done extensive testing on this stat just yet, and we won't really go any further with them today. For now, the basic premise is that more tracking equals less enemy evasion. Next, we see the number of units. Now, as anyone knows from watching their fighters or bombers attack, you don't get all of your hangar units right away at the start of the battle. Each one takes time to take off from their carrier. The stat the game gives us is plus 0.13 per clock unit thingy, which I'm just going to call seconds. This means every second you'll get 0.13 more fighters, or in other words, you'll have a fighter launch roughly every 7.7 seconds, up to a maximum of 8 per hangar. Then, we've got a cooldown of 2.5 clocks, which, again, I'm calling seconds. So, every 2.5 seconds, a fighter will shoot at anything that is within range. Lastly, the range of each fighter is the same at 8. This is how far away a target a fighter can be before engaging the target. Now let's see what the fighters are up against. Again, we'll go over each stat, but most of these are self-explanatory. First, there's HP, which is the amount of damage the unit can take before being destroyed. As the missiles go up in rank, they get more HP. Same with torpedoes. However, swarm missiles only have 1 HP. Not that that will ever matter. And note, this is the same for all missile sizes. Small, medium, large, they all have the same HP per rank. Next, we go to evasion. As I mentioned before, this is the stat that will cause enemy shots to miss. As you can see, missiles get more evasive as they upgrade, but torpedoes will stay the same. However, when we go to swarm missiles, we can see that the evasion is a whopping 200%. This means that we can expect pretty much every shot to miss when it's trying to hit a swarm missile. Next, we've got cooldown, which is how long it takes for each missile to fire. Again, we're going with seconds instead of arbitrary clocks. Last, we have a new stat, speed. Obviously, this is how fast the missile travels, but there's no speed stat listed for any of the fighter units. So, how do we know how they compare? Well, first, I think it's safe to assume that each fighter has the same type of speed, if only because they all seem to move about as fast. After my last carrier video, I didn't notice any difference in the speed between the Mark I fighters to the Mark III fighters, or any other combination thereof. If you know differently, please let me know, but for now, we'll assume that whatever this fighter's speed is, it is the same across the board. Next, while I don't know the exact speed stat of a fighter unit, after comparing them in flight to swarm missiles and regular missiles, I think we can estimate their speed to be somewhere roughly around 2 or 3. As you can see, the swarm missiles move roughly twice as fast as the fighters, and the regular missiles seem to outrun them as well, though not what I'd estimate as twice their speed. Great, now we got our numbers, so let's do a rundown of what we can expect our fighters to be able to deal with. I'll start with the Mark III fighter. As mentioned previously, we've got an average damage of 4.5 with 70% accuracy being dealt every 2.5 seconds. For simplicity's sake, we'll assume all the fighters are launched and ready to engage, and in most cases, this will be true, since the entire hangar will be airborne by around 61.5 seconds into the battle. Since there's no evasion bonuses to worry about for the regular missiles and the torpedoes, we can expect the Mark III fighter to do about 10 HP worth of damage to the missiles and torpedoes every second. Comparatively, each missile has the following HP PS, or HP per second. So, we can calculate from here how many Mark I missiles we can expect our Mark III fighter to be able to contain. The Mark III fighter has a DPS of 10.08 against the Mark I missiles, and the Mark I missile has an HPPS of 0.18. Now, we can't simply divide the DPS by the HPPS and figure out how many missiles can be countered because this would assume the DPS is evenly spread, when in fact, each fighter's shot is overkilling the missiles by quite a bit. If the DPS were evenly spread, we'd expect the Mark III fighter to be able to manage about 56 incoming missiles. However, in practice, that's simply not the case. Instead, we have to look at the actual cooldowns, and it's clear that the Mark III fighter wing will shoot a little faster than twice for every missile that is launched, i.e., we can expect the fighter wing to handle about 16 missiles under ideal circumstances. But as we can see, it's not even really capable of that. And as we go down further to 14 missiles, or 12 missiles, or 10 missiles, we see that some missiles are still escaping our fighters. As we go down to 8 though, we can finally see what exactly is happening. The missiles are outrunning the fighters, which means that little speed stat actually matters. So what's happening is that when the missiles are being launched in volleys, the fighters can't shoot fast enough to destroy all the missiles, and so they try to give chase. But the missiles are able to escape the fighter's range before they can be destroyed and hit the target. Effectively, when the missiles are launched together, they have an HP pool that is larger than what the fighters can handle. As such, fighters cannot provide a perfect defense against missiles. So now we know. But we also know that fighters are obviously having some impact on the effectiveness of missiles, even if they aren't completely disabling the missiles. So, when we compare the footage from 8, 10, and 12 missiles, we see roughly similar performance of the fighters, with a few missiles escaping here and there. Though at 12, we see 1 to 2 missiles escape more consistently. And as we look at 14 and 16, the escape rate is even higher and more consistent. On top of this, since Mark III fighters have the same accuracy and do at least 4 damage, we can expect them to perform equally well against the same number of Mark II, 3, and Mark IV missiles, which have 2, 3, and 4 HP respectively. This means we can expect Mark III fighters to take 1 to 2 hits to take out a Mark V missile, meaning about twice as many Mark V missiles will escape. So, this makes the fighters seem pretty useless, right? Well, we've got to keep in mind that we're comparing 1 weapon slot against 10 weapon slots or more right now. And while the fighters aren't stopping the 10 weapon slots, they are at least seriously weakening them and rendering the enemy fleet far less effective. This means having just 1 fighter wing can buy you a lot of time if you're fighting a missile fleet, and bring your own guns to bear on the enemy. Additionally, when we compare the fighter stats, we can see that each fighter iteration will have a maximum effectiveness against 1 missile iteration higher than it. This means Mark II fighters will perform equally good against Mark I through Mark III missiles, Mark I fighters against Mark I through Mark II missiles, and scouts only able to take on Mark I missiles. After that, each level above the fighters will see a drop in fighter performance, much like how we see the Mark III fighter begin to fail against the Mark V missile. Now, let's go ahead and look at the torpedoes. First, we'll show the Mark III fighters against the Mark II torpedoes. The torpedoes have 4 HP and 5 speed, just like the Mark IV missiles. So, we'd expect a similar result with a few torpedoes escaping when we put 10 torpedoes against 1 Mark III fighter wing. However, torpedoes don't act the same way as missiles. This is because torpedoes can only be fitted to corvettes and cruisers, which are brawler-type ships and always try to get in close. This means that when torpedoes are launched in a volley very near to their target, they only have a short distance to cover, and the fighters just don't have enough time to shoot them all down. We can also expect similar performance when we fit missiles to the corvette and cruisers lines, which we can see here. As such, fighters are at a disadvantage when missiles are engaging from close range. However, we also see that fighters perform similarly against torpedoes when they are beginning their engagement. This coincidentally brings us to our next topic, distance. As noted before, the longer the range of the engagement, the more time fighters have to get airborne, and the more time they have to take out incoming missiles. When engaging at medium and short range, however, not only do fighters have less time to attack incoming missiles, but they will also be out of sync with the missile volley, and instead attack the enemy ships rather than hold their fire and attack the missiles. This is true at long range as well, but since fighters have more room to chase down incoming missiles, the effect is less pronounced. As such, if you're using missiles against enemy fighter fleets, you will want to equip missiles to corvettes and cruisers, or better yet torpedoes, as torpedoes have more penetrating power. Lastly, I just wanted to cover the cluster or swarm missiles. We saw before that the swarm missiles have 200% evasion, which, if true, means they cannot be shot down by fighters, and when we test this, we can see that this is in fact the result. Swarm missiles are fighter-proof. However, it appears that while fighters will continuously try to shoot down swarm missiles and fail to do so, the fighters will continue to successfully shoot down regular missiles as well. As such, equipping just a few swarm missiles will not provide perfect coverage for your regular missiles. However, as opposed to my other clips that had just one fighter wing, this clip is showing 2 fighter wings against 5 Mark IV missiles and 5 swarmer missiles, which means that there is an oversaturation of fighters in this clip. The fact that even a few missiles are able to get close and almost hit the carriers means that the swarm missiles do provide some sort of coverage, and as such, you could help protect your missiles by adding a few swarm missiles, most preferably in small weapon slots of destroyers or battleships, to tie up the enemy's anti-missile defenses. This is because the small slots will let you use more swarm missiles, and because the swarm missiles do not do considerable damage on their own anyway. With all that said, here are the conclusions I believe we can make from this video. 1. Fighters are a good, but not perfect countermeasure to missiles. While one fighter wing won't shut down 10 missile slots, it can have a huge impact on the missiles and effectively give your fleet a lot more defensive power. 2. When fighting against missiles with fighters alone, try to stay at range. When using missiles, try to get close. The less time there is for a missile to be shot down, the more missiles will hit the target. 3. Torpedoes are superior to missiles against fighter defense. They can only be fitted to corvettes and cruisers, but these ships will bring torpedoes to their ideal range, being point blank, and cause them to hit their target more frequently. 4. Swarmer missiles provide some, but not perfect, chaff effect in covering incoming missiles from anti-missile measures. Best practice would be to try and fit a few swarmer missiles into small slots of long-range ships if you encounter heavy anti-missile defenses and you want to continue using missiles. Otherwise, that's all for now. If you've seen something I should reconsider, or think you've spotted an error, or you think of something else I should test, please let me know in the comments below. I'm always glad to hear new thoughts when going through these videos. But until then, I'll see you next time, Space Cowboys. Enjoy the video? Well, hey, you should consider subscribing, or maybe checking out some of these other videos, or hey, why don't you leave a like? It'll help the channel grow. Or you can leave me a comment, maybe give me an idea for another video. Anyway, I'll see you next time.